Welcome, everyone, as we are here at Hastings College, and Andy Chase and Adam Mazer are going to sit here and do our own little version of Bracketology, a little breakdown of Round 1 of the NAIA Women's Basketball National Championship 2025 edition. Of course, we're going to spend a little bit of time in our bracket as Hastings gets ready to take on College of the Ozarks. And then, of course, we've got an intriguing matchup on the other side between LSU Shreveport and Huntington. So, Andy, kind of just talk a little bit about what your thought process is. We've got a big matchup coming. There's a little bit of history between College of the Ozarks and Hastings College, and it's going to turn into kind of an intriguing matchup.
Yeah, when the last matchup in between the two, you have to go back to my senior year of college when we played them in the second round. It was a 2-3 matchup, Hastings being the, I believe, 3 seed and College of the Ozarks being the 2 seed. And it was a daunting task for Hastings then, and the score kind of showed. It was a 86-55 final in favor of the Bobcats, and they were just shooting on all cylinders in that game. Kelsey Clayton with 22 points, Cassidy Johnson with 22, and then they had 2 other players in double digits. Of course, Kelsey Clayton was, I believe, averaging about a triple-double a game that season. So it was a lot to look at, and I think we have a little bit of a flip here. Going into this game, you have Hastings was much more defensive-minded back in 2019, and C of O was very much offensive-minded. I think going into Friday's matchup, it's Hastings is the very much offensive-minded compared to C of O, who's very defensive-minded, but can score as well.
Well, when you sit here and you look at it from that standpoint, it is true, but Hastings doesn't have a Chandra Farmer that's going off for 14, 15, 16 points a game like they did back then. You're sitting here trying to rely on players that spread across the board. You're not just looking at one player that can go out and score, and that's what College of the Ozarks is going to have to really pay attention to coming to this game, because you've got a true freshman, McKenna Yates, that can go out and score in double digits pretty easily. Mariah Avila out of Scotts Bluff, she can go out and give you double digits at any time. And then you get Amboza that can come off the bench and go off for 24. You just don't know what to expect there. Macy Bryant, she had a great game against Northwestern in the GPAC tournament. She hits those huge 3 late threes that lets us pull away from Northwestern in that game. And I kind of see this as a Northwestern-Hastings kind of matchup. You've got a big girl over there at College of the Ozarks. You're really going to have to do a great job in slowing down Susanna Moran. She's coming in averaging a double-double, over 17 points a game, 14 boards, and that's no different than what Northwestern brought to the table. And so you're going to have to do a very good job. And, we're going to be a lot different than we were back then. This is 40 minutes of hell. You're getting, as soon as Hastings makes a shot, misses a shot, it's full court press. And so that's something that College of the Ozarks is going to have to be able to handle. They're not as deep as Hastings. Like I said, we could keep going. Rachel Gooden could have a big game. Kieran Pauks made great big shots for Hastings. And then, of course, Bailey Kissinger can go off. And so you have a really unique situation here for Hastings where they can hone in on a Susanna Moran, a Logan Jones, a Taylor Rush, can really try and slow them down and use their depth as their advantage in this one.
Yeah, and kind of going off Susanna Moran there, I think one thing that Hastings is really going to see is they might have to rely a little more on the three-point shooting of a Macy Bryant or Tatis Arredondo, because College of the Ozarks, they're going to be tough under the net. I really, just looking at it in terms of NAIA, they're 4th nationally in defensive rebounds per game, averaging almost 32 defensive rebounds a game. 18th nationally in total rebounds, averaging 44. Susanna Moran just so happens to be ranked first in nationally in defensive rebounds and second in total rebounds. Hastings, on the other side, I think that's going to be something that they're going to want to make sure that they get shots to go, because opponent rebounds per game, Hastings ranks 139th nationally, giving up nearly 39 rebounds a game to the opposing defense. So I think that's something they're going to have to rely on beyond the arc shots. Hastings will be able to get that pressure, but I'm interested to see how well College of the Ozarks does at stopping Hastings under the net. I think that might be a difference maker, like you said. Northwestern did a really good job at stopping Hastings from scoring down under the net, and Hastings was able to pull off the win there, even though they were shooting, what was the
33.8% in the game.
Yeah, so Hastings is a lethal team. They can find ways to be scrappy without the percentages looking the greatest.
Well, I've been around this for a very long time, and I can tell you teams that shoot 33.8% don't also score 81 points in the same game. So, you have to look at intangibles of points off turnovers is going to be critical for Hastings. Full court pressure, they like to turn teams over. And then another big thing there is going to be bench points. It's an intangible that a lot of teams don't have the luxury of, where Hastings will at times outscore teams 51-10 from bench points. They'll have more bench points than starter points because they're that deep. So when you have the team that comes off with Bailey Kissinger, Kieran Polk, and Ambrose that comes off the bench, they're dangerous. And that's something where you can sit here and think, okay, well, maybe we can work matchups, but then you still have Macy Bryant that can start. You got Rachel Gooden that can cause problems inside and alter shots. And even when you have Gentry Marks that comes off the bench, she gives you good minutes. She doesn't have to score a lot. She'll pull down 3 or 4 rebounds in the game. She'll get a couple of buckets for you. And that's something that you have to have when you're running 5 in, 5 out, running 40 minutes of hell. And so that's the dynamic of this team, that even though they may not play their best basketball, you still almost have to score 85, 86 points to beat them. And even if you do, you can go back to what happened with Northwestern. Northwestern probably played one of their best basketball games offensively against us in the regular season, put up 92, but still gave up 101 because Hastings shot lights out. And what do you do when an Ambrose just goes off? So that's a dynamic to where you can't just shut someone down. It seemed like Northwestern was able to do that. Ambrose didn't have a big game in that GPAC tournament, but then you turn around and look back on it and go, well, that's because Macy Bryant was left wide open. They're going to leave people wide open. It's just a matter of, will they hit shots when it counts, especially now that you're going up against some of the best teams in the country.
And a point to make, that talking about having to score a lot of points, College of the Ozarks, they're only averaging about 70.5 points a game. I think that's going to be something to look at. Can they keep up the pace with Hastings that is averaging 80.6 points a game? Can they keep up with the scoring lethality of Hastings?
Statistically, no. If you play the game out on paper, no, they just don't. But that's why you play the games. That's the fun of it. That's why we enjoy having conversations about different dynamics that could play out. But again, with Hastings playing that full court press defense, and then they come back and they play in that really tough zone defense, that's where it's going to be really interesting to see if a Moran can get her shot from the low block, because that's where it's at. And then if she gets fouled, she's only a 62% free throw shooter. In one game, I remember going back just a couple games ago for College of the Ozarks, they went 20 for 35 from the free throw line. And so that's another dynamic that's going to play out, because they're not the best free throw shooting team that's in this pod. And if they get to the foul line a lot, it may not be to their benefit. Where we go back to the Northwestern game, we ended up shooting really well at the free throw line, and that benefited us greatly in winning that game 101-92.
Yeah, and another thing, looking at free throw line or personal fouls, that was one of my notes for College of the Ozarks. They're a very well-minded team don't draw many personal fouls a game. They rank 39th nationally in personal fouls per game, only 14.8 on average. So that'll be another key aspect, I think. Will Hastings get the chance to go to the free throw line very often? And that's almost something, if it comes down to the nitty gritty and it's a 5 point game, does College of the Ozarks kind of rely on the free throw? Because Hastings, they rank 102nd in free throw percentage at 70.3%. Is that something that College of the Ozarks plays into? Of, hey, let's foul, hope they miss one, and then start. If they're down, obviously, do they rely on that? Or if it's a pretty narrow game in favor of them, do they start fouling to not allow us the chance to try and for Hastings to try and catch up?
It's an interesting dynamic, but Hastings could play the same game because College of the Ozarks only comes in with a 65.9% free throw shooting percentage, and so they don't necessarily shoot it all that great from the line either. But that is a dynamic that could play itself out, especially in a game like this where these teams are taking roughly 2 weeks off. So there is something that we may not even talk about that could come to play just because, Alyssa Baker hasn't been mentioned, and she's someone that could go off because of her athleticism. All of a sudden she hits a shot, she gets to the rack, gets an and one, and she's got 6 unexpected points that C of O wasn't expecting. So that's something that Hastings brings to the table where they can go anywhere from 10 to 12 players deep, and you don't necessarily know who's going to be the player that day that's going to go off and beat you. And that in my mind may be the difference in this type of a game where Hastings is going to force you to go up and down the floor.
Yeah, the full court press, that's something I've loved seeing Coach Douglas doing quite a bit. Is it puts that pressure on the other team, and it almost kind of gives me, to a small extent, the thought of Olivet Nazarene, how they ran the Cornell system when my sophomore year with Abby Hengisbach. It just kind of, we have the coach looks at it and it's like, okay, we have 5 people in right now. You're going to be in for 4 minutes. Next 5 come in, and Hastings like you said, Hastings has the ability to do that, and I'm really interested to see how College of the Ozarks is able to combat that. Will they get tired out? Will it be a game of attrition going into this? So a lot of really interesting small factors, I think, could turn into big factors in favor of both teams here. But you were mentioning it before we started here. The Broncos and the Bobcats played each other in a national championship game.
As a matter of fact, that was the last national championship that Hastings College won. That was back in 2006. And, we had to – it was a unique year because I had National Player of the Year Deb Remedy playing for Northwestern. And she was someone that you look at her, and she was the pre-Curry of the Curry era. She would pull up from 30 feet out, and you're just sitting here, and she'd knock it down. There was a time she went on to a CBS network, and she had made like 120 some odd straight free throws. And during the regular season, I think she still holds the collegiate record for most consecutive free throws made in games. And so she was a phenomenal athlete. She put up numbers and put up shots that was phenomenal. I'll never forget a game. You go back to, it was a quarterfinal matchup, and we were slated to play Northwestern that next day in the semifinal if they get past Cornerstone. But Cornerstone also brought an elite player, first-team All-American Brittany Smart, and they just went at it. It was one of the best women's college basketball games I had ever seen, just because these two players duked it out back and forth all game long, and it came down to Deb Remedy hitting a baseline jumper with about 5 seconds left to get her 46th point of that game. Brittany Smart couldn't knock down her shot. She finished with 48. Northwestern escaped, but they were tired, and Hastings was able to knock off Northwestern. And then here comes Powerhouse College of the Ozarks, and you're just sitting here wondering how things are going to play out. That's when you had to play 4 games in 5 days, and Hastings was able to prevail. It wasn't the prettiest game on the planet, but you know what? They prevailed, won that game 58-39 for their 3rd national title. And, yeah, and that was our last national title, was back in 2006, and I was a senior. So this studio that we're sitting in right now is quite a bit different back then. But, yeah, that's the memory we have with College of the Ozarks, and it could be another unique, dynamic game that could just add to this short history that we've had with C of O.
Talking about dynamic games, we have another game being played here.
We do.
LSU Shreveport and Huntington. This was one of those games that before doing research, I was like, okay, I know LSU Shreveport's really good. I don't know about Huntington. And I was kind of just going off of the seeding. I'm like, okay, Huntington, I don't know if they'll be able to keep up with LSU Shreveport, but after doing some research, I think this is going to be just as good of a game as the Hastings Ozarks game. You take a look, LSU Shreveport under Tim Hayes, who was originally with Southeastern of Florida. He kind of brought the same mentality of former Division 1 players. They are a tall team, literally and figuratively. Just looking at it, you have Helena Galunich, 6'1", Paula Gonzalez Herrero at 5'11", Selma Markusic at 5'6". Thankfully, they had the 5'6" player, but the rest of the team, it's 5'11" or taller. I think that's going to be a really interesting factor when they're going up against Huntington, who also is led by a former D1 player, Gabby Melby, she was previously at UT Martin. Any Nebraska fans might remember UT Martin from a few years ago in football. This entire pod here, I think, is going to be an absolute slugfest. You look at LSU Shreveport, and statistically, they are about as defensive of a team as you'll see. First in the nation in opponent field goal percentage. They're holding teams to 32.5% on average. That is insane. And then you look at it, steals per game. They're averaging 14.8. Can you, in your memory, think of any teams that were stealing at that high of a rate?
I'd have to go back to some really good Hastings teams back in the early 2000s during my time here. We had, Carrie Hofstetter, she was phenomenal. So, there were times where back then, yes, I can see us as teams. I imagine our team in 1920 was probably pretty close to that number because Emma Grenfell, Chandra Farmer both were stealing machines. So we had a lot of steals during that time as well. And so other than that, though, there's probably some other teams out there. I remember there was a Judson team back in 06 as well that they were super athletic and turned teams over. They just didn't shoot the ball real well. And I think they were averaging like 19 to 20 steals a game. It was unbelievable. I remember that because that was the same season we beat Ozarks in the national championship. And if I'm not mistaken, there was almost 70 total turnovers in that basketball game just because both teams could steal the rock pretty easily because they were just super athletic. So, but in today's day and age, you don't see stealing like you used to when I was back in my day. And so, yeah, 14.8 is a high number. One of the big things you have to recognize is this is exactly what Southeastern was doing back in 2020. They utilized their size to their advantage. So a lot of times they'll get lots of blocks and lots of steals because if you try and go into the lane, you got trees around you. You got no way to get rid of the ball, and so they're going to turn you over a lot. So one of the things that Huntington's going to have to do is You're going to have to shoot the ball well from outside. They're probably going to have to get a little up tempo, see if they can figure that out. Because if they don't, and they just want to play half court basketball, you're not going inside. It's just going to be really, really difficult because they can collapse on you, and then the kick out three is going to have to be a big shot that's going to have to keep Southwestern from collapsing. Because if that happens and you don't knock down shots, they'll live and die by that formula. They've done it all year.
Yeah, and LSU Shreveport, I mean, you take a look at some of their other statistics as well. They're doing pretty good scoring wise as well. 72.7 points per game. Huntington, that's one thing I'm interested to see. Huntington average, they're 25th nationally, 77.1 points per game. They're in a pretty respectable conference with the CCAC.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty respectable conference to be in. Scoring 77.1 points a game in that tough of a conference, I could see Huntington causing some issues. They also are very well off at the free throw line. 78.9%. Third in the nation for free throw percentage. The one other aspect I'm interested to see, they're averaging 77 points a game. LSU Shreveport answers back fourth in the nation in points per game allowed. They've only been allowing on average 53.2 points a game. That's pretty impressive in amongst itself. So I think there's going to be some dynamics there that I'm really interested to see.
Well, I'm thinking LSUS is going to come in here and they're really going to control tempo because they remind me of the Hastings College men's basketball team of a year ago, where if Hastings gets to 70, they're going to beat you. Just because they control tempo, it's not really, really fast-paced, and you can tell they don't put up a lot of shots. I mean, when you really look at it, they only average 38.7 rebounds a game. So they're not facing a lot of shots. They're not getting a lot of shots because they're the ones that are controlling the tempo. So I think Huntington, Ozarks, and or Hastings, whomever is going to end up seeing them in the next round, if that's the case, if you end up running into LSUS, you've got to find a way to push tempo because they do have a tendency to turn the ball over. They average over 17 turnovers a game. So if you're going to play a team like this that's big, you got to get them up and down the floor, utilize, if it's Hastings, depth, and that's something that you have to do. And I think Huntington's going to have to do that in this matchup if they're going to have a chance. Because at the end of the day, if you try and play LSUS basketball, you're not going to score much. I mean, 53 points, that's not going to win you any basketball games. It just isn't. So, you're going to have, if you're Huntington, you got to come in, nothing to lose mentality, and play up tempo, turn them over a little bit, see if you can get some fast break points, and that may be the difference in a game like this.
Yeah, and for both teams, the beautiful thing with both of their teams, they don't really have one player that does all this scoring. Both teams are well spread out. For LSUS, you have Galunich averaging 11.8, Paula Gonzalez Herrero with 11.3, Markusic with 12.6. For Huntington, Gabby Melby 16.3, Liv Rabi with 14.6, and Bailey Kellum with 13.7. So I don't think you're really going to see any one player really stand out in the scoring column.
You mean like Jessica Carruthers of IU Northwest, who averages 31.1 points a game when they don't have a player like her? Or even a Kaylee Darnell of Rio that averages over 23 a game? They don't have anybody that can do that. on a consistent basis.
I feel like they could have someone do that. It's just
not to the consistent basis, yeah.
Statistically, there's no real one player that is going to absolutely turn the tide for either team.
And that's a dynamic that I'm seeing as you actually look at the bracket as a whole. there are teams that have a few players that can go off, and then there are teams like the Hastings of the world, the Huntingtons, the College of the Ozarks, the LSUSs that spread the wealth. And I'm really curious to see how this plays out, if the spread the wealth is going to be it, or if you have those dynamic players like the Crothers that can carry you through a tournament because you can just flat out go out and score at any time. That's a dynamic that I'm really interested to see throughout the bracket. What plan works out? Is it going to be doing it, 5 in, 5 out like Hastings does and spread the wealth? Or is it going to be, I've got a dynamic player and we're going to go out and we're just going to be able to utilize her to beat you?
So, I completely agree, and it's going to be really fun to see. But with our bracket, you want to have a little bit of fun and
we might as well. We did a lot of talking.
I truly think Hastings will take care of business against Ozarks. I this was one of those games when I was sitting in your office kind of going through and filling out my bracket. LSU Shreveport Huntington. I'm actually really torn on that one. I put LSU Shreveport, but both of these games we could see a Ozarks Huntington or LSU Ozarks.
That unique 12-13 that you see in the NCAA that happens almost every year, it seems. Let's just hope we're not a part of that.
Yeah.
I agree. I think Hastings is going to be a little bit too much because they're up-tempo and the way they can score. Even if they're not shooting it well, they can get to the rack. I think they'll be able to contain Moran and be able to find a way to get that victory there. And then I'm going to edge on LSU Shreveport just because Coach Hayes, he's been there. He's done this before. He knows how to control tempo. And obviously they've done it. They've only got 3 losses where Huntington has gotten into some games where games have gotten away from them. And so I would say you give the edge to LSU Shreveport and you'd get a 4-5 Hastings LSU-esque matchup.
Now, who do you have for that one?
That's a unique game because it's 2 different styles. You've got the style that we were able to see Coach Hayes back when he actually played Concordia. His tall style, his slow down, big girl style was able to beat Concordia. Concordia was a 5 in, 5 out. So he knows that dynamic. He knows that system. He knows how to beat it. But they're not a team that I think is going to run away from a Hastings. They're just not built that way. They're built to, we'll beat you 72-60, but that's as big of a win as we'll probably get because we're going to control tempo. We do not want you to get up and down. Where Hastings is going to say, no, we're going to use our legs. And I think that's why the back-to-back is going to be critical for these teams. Which team's going to be able to keep their legs going into day 2? And I would give that slight edge to Hastings just on the sheer happenstance you don't know who might beat you. And you may have an Ambrose that goes off one night before, but then the next night McKenna Yates could go off. And then you'd have maybe a Bailey Kissinger's that's able to get to the rack. You just don't know. So I'd give that slight edge to Hastings. It's home court advantage, and it's one of those things where this group is itching for the victory. So I'd give that slight edge to Hastings.
I would agree with that. Also, one thing to think about with travel, you mentioned that LSU Shreveport and Huntington, both of them might be a little tired from traveling here as well. And I'm interested to see how that one plays itself out.
That's a long way to go. You got LSU Shreveport, they're flying in, that's 775 miles. Some jet lag could work into that. Huntington's they're going to jump into a van and take off. That's 761 miles. And I mean, College of the Ozarks, you look at them. They're still 7.5 hours away down in Branson, Missouri. And so none of them are short trips. And so that's the uniqueness of a national tournament that's not going to Sioux City. It's going to all these different pods, and that's the uniqueness that's playing out. That's different than it was 4 and 5 years ago when we were talking about this.
Yeah. Thinking about Sioux City, do you think Ozarks brings their 2 buses of fans with I always remember seeing the fans in the front there with the shirts off and painted bobcats on their
It's been tradition. I don't know why it would be any different. I mean, yes, it's a field of 64 instead of a field of 32, but at the end of the day, that's what they've done. So I don't see why this would be any different and why they wouldn't send a student section. So we'll have to get ready for that.
Yeah, that's a thing that we'd even think about with Ozarks. They might bring up.
Oh, I thought about it.
Yeah,
I
and
thought
then
about it.
Hastings, we're on spring break right now. I wonder how much that's going to play into.
Well, we should have baseball and softball there on Friday.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah. So that'll be interesting to see. But outside of our pod, take a slight gander at the other pods.
Yeah, we might as well. I got a few notes written down, and we can kind of buzz through what we think is going to play out. I mean, some of these I think are going to be pretty simple, and then there's some unique things that I've jotted down that could play out in some of these.
You saw my bracket. I also had some very interesting upsets in the pods.
Did you have Haskell beating Dort?
No. But Dort is on my upset alert.
They are. That is true.
I think out of the St. Francis Rocky Mountain, the 8-9 matchup, St. Francis will get out of that one. I'm really interested to see if Dort being in Hastings Conference, we've got to see a lot more of them than, say, any of these other.
Absolutely.
And I'm really interested to see because Dort has had a little bit of a rough time going into conference tournament. Obviously, they went and took care of business in the GPAC.
And that's saying something because I don't. Briarcliff's no pushover.
No.
And they took care of business and they found a way to work through the GPAC tournament, and that's hard to do. When you take some late season losses to Dakota Wesleyan and Hastings, but then you still find a way to battle back and work your way through the GPAC tournament to win the championship, that's really, really hard to do. So for the fact that they were able to pull that off tells me that they're ready for a national tournament run.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see because I believe, I could be wrong here, but St. Francis is still led by Steve Brooks. No?
Not anymore.
I couldn't remember if he was still there or not.
He's not there anymore.
So anyone that doesn't know, Steve Brooks, one of the all-time winningest coaches in NAIA women's basketball history. He had a couple national titles at Indiana Wesleyan and took over at a St. Francis that we also, I believe that was my junior year when they just about got upset by when it was 1 to 8 seeds.
32 team brackets. UC Merced?
Yep.
Actually, yeah, John McGinty. John McGinty. I looked him up. He's the coach. He took over in 2021.
Okay.
So,
what's a upset that you have in these pools here?
Well, I like I said, I've got Dort coming out. I just think they're playing well enough. I think Macy Sievers, Jamie Van Dong, I don't see them getting knocked out. I really don't. I think they're at a high level. The one that isn't a massive upset, I think Dakota Wesleyan's going to find a way to get out of Langston's bracket. That to me, it's a cool story to see Blue Mountain Christian come out, be the 8th seed down in their conference, run the table, get to their first ever national tournament. It's going to be a cool experience. But Langston's good. Langston's athletic, but Dakota Wesleyan knows how to beat teams like that. Coach Christensen, he's done this before. He knows how to prepare for teams like this. So that's why I'll give the edge to D-Dub to come out of that bracket. There's a team that kind of caught me off guard. So I think Marion's got to be a little bit careful. And it's a Milligan squad that I look at that has some players that could go flat out score the rock. I mean, they've got a J.C. Jenkins and a Samaj Clark. Jenkins is averaging 20.4 points a game. Clark is averaging 15.5 points a game. Both of them are pulling down, between the two of them, over 15 rebounds a game. So between those two, they are a dynamic duo that could cause a lot of problems for teams. And J.C. Jenkins shoots 48% behind the arc. 80 for 166. And so when you hear something like that, you're thinking that's the team that I'd keep an eye on. I'd still edge Marion, but I would not shy away from a Milligan coming out of that bracket just because they have the scoring that we haven't really seen in our conference. We don't have anybody that averages 22, 23, 24 points a game. So that's some uniqueness there. I think Cumberland's is going to take care of business. There's a Shawnee State out there. There's Sienna Gloucester that's averaging a double-double on the season. We actually have a lot of players that are averaging a double-double, and this is one that I think she's only missed out a double-double on 4 games this season. Otherwise, she's had a double-double every single game for Shawnee State. So she's going to create a lot of problems there, but at the end of the day, I think Cumberland's comes out of that bracket and takes care of business and avenges their lone loss that they took. I haven't seen, like I said, I think Bethel, they're too hot out of Tennessee. I think they're going to take care of business there. William Carey, I don't really see anybody causing them too many problems. I just think they're too well-rounded. Xavier's going to because their numbers are nearly identical. One team averages 72.8 points a game. Xavier averages 73.8, and they only give up 58. And so that's a game that's probably going to be close at the end if it's those two teams coming out. But I'd edge William Carey just because they've had the long-standing year. And then you look at Southern Oregon. I don't think they're going to see any problems across the board. The one issue they could have is a Wayland Baptist just because they could score the rock. Southern Oregon's averaging 77 points a game, and Wayland Baptist comes in averaging almost 83. And they got 2 players in Megan Nestor, averaging 20 points a game, and Caitlin Jordan, averaging 17.1. And Megan Nestor's another one of those double-double, 19.9 points a game, 13.4 rebounds a game, and she's a game changer. So if there's something that could happen, watch Wayland Baptist. I know it's a long trip, but watch for Wayland Baptist to maybe defeat Southern Oregon in that matchup.
On my bracket here, I had the Flying Queens of Wayland Baptist.
Queens.
Wayland Baptist coming out of that one.
Yep.
Southern Oregon, to me, was one of those. I understand they're the only undefeated team, but when I was looking at it, their strength of schedule is triple digits.
Yep. And sometimes that's tough. Some years you think the Cascade's going to give you some great stuff, or maybe go play some teams out of the Frontier, and it just wasn't there this year. And so, and you look at it from that standpoint, their strength schedule is pretty weak. And then you got a team like Carroll that's coming in that you look at them last year, they were really a good quality team. But Carroll this year, they don't score the ball. And I mean, they play good defense. They only give up 54.7 points a game, but they only score 60. And so I don't think a Carroll's going to cause any problems for Wayland in that first game. And UC Merced, I just think the depth of games that they have not played. They have not played a lot of games this year, and I think Southern Oregon will take care of that. But Wayland Baptist is a team that I would certainly look out for. Campbellsville, I don't see them having any issues. Again, Williams Baptist could cause some problems because they just do this. They average over 90 a game. Just get up tempo. So that could be a fun game to watch, but I think Campbellsville has played enough games like that to where they know how to control that tempo, turn teams over. I think, another intriguing matchup, I've said this to you the other day, Dakota State, Governor State. I think that'll be an intriguing one. I don't think Arizona Christian or Montana Tech is going to be a problem. I would edge Governor State in that one to get out of that. Looking at it today, I said I think Governor State's going to have the edge if they can handle the travel. So that's one that I said. I don't see anybody in the Briarcliff bracket that's going to cause them any problems. Briarcliff they can flip a switch, and when they do, wow, they're one of the best teams in the country. And
going back, that Governor State, Dakota State potential matchup, I hope the time of that game is later in the day so it doesn't interfere with our game at all, because I want to watch that matchup.
Yep, I do too. Mid-American Nazarene, I said this all along. I think Northwestern is a matchup nightmare for just about anybody. And watching Mid-American Nazarene play down the stretch, the one thing Northwestern has a tendency to do, and this is their downfall, and they did it against Hastings multiple times, is they have a tendency to have really bad turnovers at bad times. Because there were times against Hastings in the GPAC quarterfinal where they had Hastings on the ropes, and it was just bad turnover after bad turnover. Let Hastings hang around, and then they had that 13-0 run at the end. That's the only downfall. If Northwestern can fix that, with those are fixable things. If they go out and they fix those issues, I pick Northwestern come out of that bracket. I do. I just think they've got Skaney is Molly Skaney is a phenomenal player, double, 16.7 and 10.1. And Hallie Anderson, she's someone that went off for 28 against Hastings, and that's hard to do. And I think if she goes off too, and she's a unique left-handed player that can get to the rack, she can shoot it. Man, that's a team I did not want to see in my bracket if I was a top seed.
And going back and talking about just having the experience, Northwestern's head coach, his name is fleeting me right now, but he has been there for 24 years. I think he started in 2003, 2004, somewhere in that range. He's been there a long, long time, and Northwestern has always been a dangerous team to play. So I think him, Jason Christensen, those types of coaches that have been there for a long time and have the understanding of Tim Hayes. They had the understanding of, hey, this is what it means to be in the national championship. This is what it means to, and all three of them know what it's like to be in the national semifinals as well. I think that will be one of those interesting factors to watch, as well as some of these coaches who have been at their school for 10, 15, 20 plus years. How much does that play into effect of knowing how to talk, how to get their players ready for these big games?
So you had Earl Wildstrom and then Chris Yaw.
Chris Yaw.
You were thinking of Chris Yaw, but he stepped away from the game in 21.
Oh, who was it that I know is one of our last home games here?
But Kristen Roeder is now the head coach for Northwestern.
Okay.
Yeah. But I remember, trust me, Chris Yaw, they had some great teams. I mean, they were good.
The coaching may have changed, but I think still the schools, Hastings, Ozarks, Tim Hayes at LSU Shreveport, Jason Christensen, Dortz, Bill Hamza, they all had this, we know what it means. I mean, Dort, they're the defending national champions.
They're not the clear cut this year.
No, but at least they had that, okay, this is what we're going for. They have players that have that national title still on their team, so they know, okay, this is the goal. The players are able to help themselves, or the younger players that may not have been on the team last year, transferred in, graduated high school.
Look at Hastings, Nebraska this year. They got 5 freshmen that are contributing, that were playing high school basketball last year. You know, you have Bailey Kissinger that dealt with injuries. You have Macy Bryant that was, sitting on the bench at a Division II school down the road here. So you got a lot of players that are coming in contributing this year at Hastings, and a lot of schools are dealing with that. And it's kind of cool to see that dynamic and how that chemistry really plays itself out when you have a situation where you bring in these new players and all of a sudden they help out. Look at how it improves your team. So I look at, like I said, I think it's going to be Northwestern coming out, and then a very unique Indiana Wesleyan bracket. That one's going to be a lot of fun just because Olivet and Nazarene's in that bracket, and they average 93 points a game. Now, they're not the favorites to come out of there. Indiana Wesleyan has been pushed by a few teams this year, and so Grandview's not bad, but I would not be surprised to see Indiana Wesleyan and Olivet duke it out, and a team in Indiana Wesleyan that only gives up 58 points a game, and Olivet gives up 75, but they score 93.
You know, one I also have Indiana Wesleyan and Olivet Nazarene going up against each other. And you know what that makes me think of? I've already mentioned it once. Abby Hengisbach,
Yep.
national champ, that would have been the
Quarterfinal against
yeah.
Mount Marty.
It was the game before Indiana Wesleyan and Olivet Nazarene played
Oh,
against each
correct. Yes,
other,
I was.
and
Yes.
then the the fact that Olivet Nazarene was down double digits. I want to say they were down by 15 going into the fourth quarter, and then Abby Hengisbach just lights out. Obviously,
She was Player of the Year.
Oh yeah, yeah, just absolutely took control of that game. Olivet Nazarene ended up coming out of that one, and then uh, going up against Mount Marty. Um, Obviously, it's a little different this time around, but I kind of had that memory in my mind of that was. I remember I was the tech director for HC Media when we were doing all the games up there. That may have been the most exhilarating game to be a tech director for. That was just a bang, bang, bang. Just obviously Olivet Nazarene with their Cornell system. It was scoring 90, 100, 110 points every game just because teams couldn't keep up with them. And kind of going back to that, I think Hastings, I think that could be a factor for Hastings to make a deep run, pull off an upset. Uh, Coming out of this bracket, and maybe even pulling off an upset of Bethel.
Yep.
That
It's
how
true.
will they be able to? Because Sioux City isn't that far of a drive for us, 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Bethel, they're having to come from Tennessee. See how 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 much of the travel affects games.
Right.
That's always fun to see because you see schools like UC Merced, when they took on St. Francis. That's one of those times they had UC Merced had their key player. They probably should have won that game.
Yep.
It went into double overtime. UC Merced's top player finally fouled out, and that was all she wrote. But
Yep.
yeah, so I'm interested to see some of these matchups, just travel wise, size wise. It's going to be a really fun national championship to watch this year because there's so many
Mm-hmm.
moving pieces to this entire tournament that I don't think a lot of people realize that just because there's a number next year's school's name doesn't mean anything.
No.
And our bracket's a great example of that. 4, 13, 5, 12. Any four of these teams I feel like could make it out.
Oh, there's no doubt to that. I mean, you still look at just rounding out the last few, like St. Francis, Indiana Tech. I think they'd take care of business, but Rio Grande's another team, 90 points a game. They could give St. Francis a run for their money and come out of that bracket. I don't think Stillman can. I don't think they got enough dynamic players. And then Freed Hardeman, they're not a team that scores much. They're one of the top tiered teams that averages the least amount of points. Now they only give up 54.2. I don't think they'll have a problem against Johnson, but Florida Memorial, they got a couple dynamic players, and IU Northwest has the top scorer in the country. And like I said, Jessica Carruthers. And so, that's one where if Carruthers all of a sudden goes off, IU Northwest comes out of Freed Hardeman, which they're out of the Mid-South, which is the toughest basketball conference in the country.
Yes.
I mean, that's what's so intriguing about this tournament is, yes, usually you'll see the top dogs come out, but there's going to be some upsets this year.
Oh yeah, I know one that I had circled was Northwestern. I think that could be very, very dangerous team that could make a deep run. Dakota Wesleyan is another one that I think could make a very deep run.
Yep.
If it's a Dakota Wesleyan Dort rematch in Sioux City, both teams not all that far away from there. They're used to playing at Sioux City.
Yep.
I think that'll be an interesting dynamic, a GPAC matchup. I could see there being a couple Mid-South matchups late in the games just because
they're battle tested.
Oh yeah.
They're ready for these types of runs, and that's what Bethel is. I mean, they're battle tested. They are a team that, during the regular season, you sit there against the Mid-South and you're like, man, they didn't have a great season. But then you look at who they played and you go, well, yeah, they did. They just played against a tough team, and they make the run through the conference tournament, and now they're the number 3 overall seed coming out, and you go, well, better look out for them because they're dynamic, they can play, and they're battle tested.
Yeah, and talking about the Mid-South tournament, they were the 5 seed.
Yeah.
They're the number 3 overall. They were the 5
They were
seed.
5-7 in conference. All their losses were in conference play.
Oh yeah, I'm super excited to see how
They even had, who was it, Bethel or no? It was Freed Hardeman was in a dogfight with Lindsey Wilson in the opening round of that tournament. Lindsey Wilson was the bottom seed in that tournament. They were 10-13 overall, and they shut down Lindsey Wilson for the final 5 minutes and 33 seconds to win that game 48-46. Freed Hardeman did. So you can't even count on Lindsey Wilson out just because they're battle tested too against one of the toughest conferences in the country.
Now,
saying.
The one thing I do have to say when it comes to Mid-South, 6 of their 7 members for women's basketball are on the bracket.
Mm-hmm.
The only school that didn't make it out, Cumberland University, which for anyone that is not aware of the Mid-South, they have one of the most confusing 2 teams in their conference. It's Cumberland's, the University of the Cumberlands, and Cumberland University.
Mm-hmm.
One is from Kentucky, one is from Tennessee. My brain is all the conference realignment, what schools are in what conference. As esports coach, I've faced up against the Cumberland Phoenix. It's one of those things my brain struggles to like, okay, which one is this? Is this the Patriots or is this Phoenix?
See, I always remember them off of Cumberland's Patriots. Cumberland Phoenix. That's how I've always been able to differentiate the two.
And fun fact about the Cumberland Phoenix, they completely off topic, but the most lopsided game in NCAA football history was Georgia Tech against Cumberland, where the Georgia Tech Engineers played Cumberland. They had a coach. His last name was Heisman.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody knows what that is.
Yeah, it beat them. I believe it was 222-0.
Yep.
But that's where my brain.
Fun fact for everybody.
Anyone that doesn't know me, my brain is statistical. I love stats. I love conference realignment and all that. So my brain can go a billion different ways. I don't even know sometimes where it's going myself.
That's true. Well, on that note, that's Andy Chase. I'm Adam Mazer. That's just to give you a little bit of a preview of what's coming up here in rounds 1 and 2, especially of the Hastings bracket. When we get down to the final 16, I think Andy and I are going to come back, sit down, and try and break that one down and see if we were close on some of our guesses or if we were just way off and way wrong. So once again, Adam Mazer for Andy Chase. That'll do it from here at Hastings College.